In the heart of Los Angeles, where the sun dipped low behind the skyline, casting long shadows over the bustling streets, life unfolded in a rhythm familiar to many. Yet, for Michaela Jones, it was a rhythm that felt like an echo of her own solitude. At 27, she had established herself as a graphic designer, pouring her creativity into vibrant designs that illuminated the mundane. Her small apartment was a sanctuary of colors and canvases, a stark contrast to the gray concrete of the city outside. Every morning, she would wake to the sound of her alarm, the soft chime breaking the silence that enveloped her. She would stretch, letting the warmth of the morning sun seep through the window. After a quick shower, she would brew a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air as she prepared for another day. The world outside was alive with the hustle of commuters and the chatter of street vendors, a cacophony that both thrilled and stifled her. Michaela had always been fiercely independent, driven by the desire to carve out a life distinctly her own. Her parents had instilled in her the values of hard work and resilience, traits that had guided her through the challenges of life as a young Black woman in a competitive industry. She often reflected on her upbringing, the lessons learned from her mother's unwavering strength and her father's quiet determination. Yet, despite this solid foundation, there lingered an unshakable feeling of being an outsider, a sentiment that had followed her through school, work, and into her adult life. As she navigated the streets on her way to work, her mind was often occupied with designs and deadlines. She was known at the office for her sharp wit and creativity, yet she often found herself retreating to the corners of her mind, away from the casual banter and the clamor of office life. Her colleagues admired her talent, but struggled to penetrate the walls she had built around her heart. "Michaela!" a voice called out, snapping her from her thoughts. It was her friend and coworker, Jenna, waving from across the street. "You're going to be late." "Yeah, just lost in thought," she replied, with a smile, quickening her pace. Jenna's bright energy was infectious, a contrast to Michaela's more reserved demeanor. They often shared lunch together, and while Jenna was full of stories about her latest dating escapades, Michaela remained guarded, reluctant to divulge her own heart's complexities. As the day rolled on, the office buzzed with the excitement of an upcoming project that had the potential to elevate their agency's reputation. Michaela threw herself into her work, sketching designs and collaborating with her colleagues, her passion igniting as the deadline approached. Yet, in the back of her mind, a nagging sense of foreboding began to creep in, an instinctual warning she couldn't quite place. That evening, after a long day, Michaela decided to take a stroll through the local park on her way home. The air was crisp, and the scent of blooming flowers mixed with the earthy aroma of damp soil. She reveled in the moment, allowing herself to relax, if only for a brief respite. As she walked, her thoughts wandered to her father. He had always been a man of few words, but the lessons he imparted lingered deeply within her. She often wondered about his past, the life he had led before settling down and starting a family. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her reverie. It was a message from Jenna, asking if they could meet for drinks that weekend. A smile crept across her face as she texted back a quick affirmative. But as she continued her stroll, a feeling of unease settled over her. She couldn't shake the sensation that something was amiss, as if shadows loomed just beyond her line of sight. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, the weight of her thoughts pressed heavily upon her. Her dreams were a jumbled mix of colors and fears, reflections of a life she felt was spiraling toward an unknown. Just as she drifted into a deep sleep, a loud crash jolted her awake. Her heart raced as she squinted into the darkness of her apartment, listening intently. Nothing, just the echoes of the city outside. The next morning began like any other, but the air felt charged, as if the universe held its breath. She arrived at work, but the atmosphere was different. Whispers fluttered around the office, glances exchanged over cubicles. Michaela felt a sense of dread tighten her chest. Something was off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Hours passed, and as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the office buzzed with anticipation. The project was nearing its deadline, and everyone was on edge. Just as she settled into her work, a sudden commotion erupted at the entrance. Michaela glanced up, her heart sinking as she saw a group of men enter the office, their presence radiating an aura of danger. They were sharply dressed, exuding an air of authority that sent chills down her spine. One of them, tall and imposing, scanned the room with piercing eyes that seemed to lock onto hers. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the man from a news report, a well-known figure in the underworld, a Yakuza boss, rumored to be ruthless and unforgiving. Why was he here? Her heartbeat quickened as she exchanged worried glances with her colleagues. Before she could process the situation, the boss stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. The atmosphere grew thick with tension as he spoke with a commanding tone, demanding to speak with the owner of the agency. The owner, visibly shaken, attempted to calm the situation, but it was clear that the boss would not be deterred. "Where is he?" the boss asked, his voice low and dangerous. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Michaela's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of information she had overheard in the past. Her father, a man she revered, had once been entwined in a world she knew little about, a world that now threatened to engulf her. Suddenly, she felt a hand grip her arm, pulling her away from the chaos. It was Jenna, her eyes wide with fear. "Michaela, we need to get out of here," she whispered urgently. But before they could make a move, the boss's gaze shifted toward her, a predatory gleam in his eyes that sent a jolt of fear coursing through her. "Her," he commanded, pointing directly at Michaela. "She's coming with me." Panic surged through her, and she instinctively tried to pull away, but the grip on her arm tightened. "What? No, you can't take her," Jenna protested, stepping forward. But the boss merely raised an eyebrow, his expression unyielding. "Do not interfere," he warned, and Jenna fell silent, fear etched across her features. As Michaela was led away, the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She was being taken by a man whose reputation preceded him, a man who was known for his ruthlessness and his pursuit of vengeance. The world she had known, the life she had built, was slipping away with each step she took toward the unknown. Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, they were outside, the cool air hitting her face as she was ushered into a sleek black car. The door closed with a finality that echoed in her mind. She glanced out the window, watching the familiar cityscape blur into a surreal nightmare. As the car sped away, her heart raced with a mix of fear and confusion. Why her? What did he want? The questions flooded her mind, but the answers remained elusive, trapped in the shadows of her father's past. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. The tension in the car was palpable, the silence stretching between them like an invisible cord. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, assessing, calculating. It was unsettling, and she turned her head to steal a glance at him. He was strikingly handsome in a way that was almost intimidating, with sharp features, dark hair slicked back, and a demeanor that radiated authority. But it was the coldness in his eyes that sent shivers down her spine. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound defiant. "Names aren't important right now," he replied, his tone clipped. "What is important is that you understand the gravity of this situation." "I don't understand anything," she shot back, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why am I here? What do you want with me?" He regarded her for a moment, his expression inscrutable. "Your father owes a debt that requires repayment." Her heart sank at his words. The realization of her father's past weighed heavily on her, the shadows of his choices creeping into her present. "I don't know anything about that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Then let me enlighten you," he said, leaning closer. Your father was involved in dealings that put him on the wrong side of my family, and now it's time for him to pay." Her heart sank at his words. The realization of her father's past weighed heavily on her, the shadows of his choices creeping into her present. "I don't know anything about that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Then let me enlighten you," he said, leaning closer. "Your father was involved in dealings that put him on the wrong side of my family, and now it's time for him to pay." The implications of his words sent her spiraling into a whirlwind of fear and anger. "You can't do this. I'm not involved in whatever he did." His gaze hardened, and for a moment she saw a flicker of something beneath the surface, a flash of vulnerability that contradicted the icy exterior he projected. "You are now, whether you like it or not," he replied, his voice low but firm. As they drove deeper into the night, her mind raced with possibilities. She was caught in a web of danger and deception, a pawn in a game she had no desire to play. But beneath the fear lay a seed of defiance, a determination to understand her circumstances and perhaps reclaim her life. The car finally came to a stop outside a sprawling mansion, its opulence stark against the darkness of the night. As she was ushered out, the weight of her reality settled heavily upon her. She was in the heart of the Yakuza's world, and there was no turning back. Little did she know, the man who had kidnapped her was not just a stranger, but a key to unraveling the secrets of her father's past, and perhaps the beginning of a connection that would change everything. As she stepped out of the car, the chill of the night air bit at her skin, contrasting sharply with the oppressive heat of the vehicle. The mansion loomed before her, a stark monument to wealth and power, its grandeur both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The flickering lights illuminated the manicured gardens, casting long shadows that danced eerily in the moonlight. Each step felt heavy, as if the weight of her circumstances pressed down on her shoulders, forcing her to confront the reality of her situation. The Yakuza boss, a figure she had only seen from a distance, now stood before her, his presence commanding. Dressed in a tailored suit that accentuated his imposing physique, he exuded an aura of authority and danger. His dark eyes, piercing and unreadable, seemed to assess her, to strip away any facade she might put up. Fear intertwined with a strange curiosity as she caught sight of the intricate tattoos that peeked out from under his cuffs, a testament to his life choices and the world he inhabited. "Welker," he said, his voice smooth yet laced with an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. There was a dissonance in his tone, a blend of hospitality and threat that left her on guard. "You'll be safe here, for now." Safe. The word hung in the air, a bitter irony that made her stomach churn. She was anything but safe. She was a pawn in a game of vengeance, kidnapped because of the sins of her father. Her thoughts raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of her life that had led her to this moment. She was a daughter, a student, a woman with dreams and aspirations, now reduced to a bargaining chip in a deadly feud. Before she could formulate a response, he gestured for her to follow him inside the mansion. The interior was lavish, adorned with fine art and elegant furnishings that spoke of a life lived in excess. Yet beneath the surface of opulence lay an undercurrent of danger, a reminder that this was not a home filled with warmth, but a fortress filled with secrets. He led her through a grand hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The air felt thick with tension, and she struggled to maintain her composure. Her mind screamed at her to escape, to find a way out of this nightmare. But a part of her was drawn to him, intrigued despite the circumstances. The way he moved with purpose, the confidence in his stride, it was magnetic, even as her instincts warned her of the peril lurking behind that charm. "Take a seat," he instructed, motioning toward a plush armchair in a sunken living room. She hesitated for a moment, then obeyed, her heart racing as she settled into the cushions. The room was dimly lit, shadows clinging to the corners, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and suffocating. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked, his gaze steady. The question hung in the air like a guillotine, a reminder of the gravity of her situation. "Because of my father," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "What does this have to do with me?" He leaned back, his expression inscrutable. "Your father has made many enemies. I need you to understand the stakes of this game," he said, his tone suddenly shifting to something more serious. "You're not just a hostage, you're a message." She swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do you want from me?" He paused, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Was it regret? "I want you to see the truth about your father and the choices he made. He's not the man you think he is." Her heart raced at the implication, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You don't know anything about him," she shot back, her voice rising. "You don't know what he's done for me or how hard he's worked to keep me safe." He chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "Safety is an illusion. You're here because he failed to protect you, and now you'll serve a purpose in my plan to make him pay." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. She wanted to hate him, to see him as the villain in her story, but the truth was more complicated. Yes, he had taken her against her will, but there was an intensity to him that was hard to ignore. The way he spoke, the way his presence filled the room, it was intoxicating. Before she could respond, a knock on the door interrupted them, and a man entered, a stoic figure with a sharp suit and an air of authority. "Boss," he said, his voice low and respectful, "we need to discuss the situation with the rival clan." The boss's demeanor shifted instantly, the warmth vanishing as he turned his full attention to the newcomer. "Give me a moment," he replied curtly, dismissing the man with a wave of his hand. Once the door closed behind him, he returned his focus to her, a mixture of determination and frustration in his gaze. "I didn't want you to see that side of my world just yet," he admitted, running a hand through his dark hair. "But you need to understand, this is not just about revenge, it's about survival." She felt a spark of empathy for him, despite her situation. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his expression vulnerable for the first time. "The Yakuza operates on loyalty and betrayal. My enemies are everywhere, and they will stop at nothing to destroy me. You being here, it complicates things, but it also gives me leverage." Her heart raced at the implications. "Leverage? You mean to use me as a pawn against my father?" "It's more complicated than that," he replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "I'm not just a monster. I'm a man trying to navigate a world filled with treachery. Your father made choices that have repercussions for both of us." She studied him closely, searching for any hint of deception. "And what if I refuse to cooperate? What will you do then?" He held her gaze, and for a moment, the tension in the room shifted. "You're not in a position to refuse, but I'm not without options. If you choose to cooperate, I can ensure your safety. If you resist..." His words trailed off, leaving a chilling silence in their wake. The implications were clear, and her heart sank. She was caught in a web spun from revenge, family betrayal, and a man whose motivations were just beginning to unfold before her. As the night wore on, their conversation shifted from threats to something more personal. They spoke of their lives, their pasts, and the weight of expectations. She learned that he had been groomed for power from a young age, a life of privilege shadowed by violence and loss. He spoke of his family, the sacrifices made, and the burdens he carried. "I've lost everything I cared about," he confessed, his voice low. "But I will not lose myself to this war. I won't let him destroy me." His vulnerability unnerved her. Here was the man who had kidnapped her, yet he spoke with a depth of feeling that caught her off guard. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she was about to discover the depths of her own strength, and perhaps the truth about her father. The lines between enemy and ally blurred, and she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the lengths one would go to protect those they cared for. And as the darkness enveloped her, she couldn't shake the feeling that in this twisted world, the real danger might not come from the enemies outside, but from the connection that was slowly forming between her and the man who held her captive. As the days blurred into one another, she found herself adjusting to an existence that felt both surreal and suffocating. The opulence of her surroundings contrasted sharply with the turmoil in her heart. Each morning, she would wake up in the lavish suite of the Yakuza boss, the sunlight filtering through the heavy curtains, illuminating the expensive furnishings that surrounded her. It was a life of luxury, but it came with an unshakable weight. She was a prisoner caught in a game of revenge, and while the boss had shown her kindness in fleeting moments, the reality of her situation loomed over her like a dark cloud. Before you skip, just remember, channels like this only survive if you hit subscribe. Otherwise, stories like this one just disappear. It was during one of those mornings that she first caught a glimpse of him without the mask of cold indifference he usually wore. He stood by the window, silhouetted against the rising sun, his posture rigid and commanding. The shadows danced across his features, hiding the complexity that lay beneath. She hesitated, watching him from the plush bed, a flurry of emotions swirling within her. It was unsettling how he captivated her, even when he seemed so distant. He was a paradox, a man who held power with an iron fist, yet seemed to carry an unseen burden. "Why are you always staring?" he said suddenly, his voice low and gravelly, breaking the silence that enveloped the room. She jolted, realizing she had been lost in thought, her defenses momentarily down. "I'm not a painting for your amusement." "I wasn't staring," she replied, trying to sound defiant, though her heart raced at the intensity of his gaze. "Just observing." "Observing?" he echoed, a hint of amusement sparking in his dark eyes. "You think you can learn something about me from a distance?" She held his gaze, refusing to back down. "You might be surprised what can be learned without words." His expression shifted, and for a moment, the walls he had built around himself seemed to crack. She caught a glimpse of vulnerability, a flash of something deeper that compelled her to push further. "Why do you keep me here?" she asked, the question hanging heavily between them. He stepped closer, the air thickening with tension. "You know why. It's not just about you. It's about your father." Her heart sank at the mention of her father. The weight of his actions, the ghosts of his past, loomed over them both. "What do you want from me?" she pressed, her voice trembling slightly. "What do you think I can do to repay for his sins?" He regarded her with a mixture of disdain and intrigue. "You think you can repay anything? You're a pawn in this game, just like everyone else." "But," he paused, his gaze softening slightly, "you're different. You're not just a tool to be used." The tension between them was palpable, electric. She could feel her heart racing as they stood mere inches apart, the world outside fading away. There was a magnetic pull that drew her toward him, and despite the danger that surrounded them, she found herself wanting to know more about the man behind the mask. "What do you mean?" she asked, curiosity overriding her trepidation. He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "You're strong. I respect that. But it doesn't change the fact that you are still caught in a world you know nothing about." "And you think I want to be part of your world?" she challenged, crossing her arms defiantly. He smirked, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "You don't have a choice, do you?" As much as she wanted to deny it, he was right. Her life had been turned upside down in a matter of days, and now she was ensnared in a web of danger and intrigue. The more she tried to fight against it, the more she felt the constraints tightening around her. Days passed, and the tension between them escalated. Each interaction was charged with unspoken words and lingering glances. The boss's cold demeanor began to melt away in her presence, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the surface. He would share snippets of his life, his motivations, and his regrets, sometimes late at night when the world outside was quiet and they were left alone with their thoughts. He spoke of his rise to power, the sacrifices he had made, and the loyalties that bound him to his dangerous lifestyle. She listened intently, captivated by his words, even as they filled her with dread. The Yakuza world was dark and unforgiving, yet she could see the flicker of humanity in him that contradicted the monster he was meant to be. "I never wanted this life," he admitted one night, leaning against the edge of the grand piano in the corner of the room. "But when you're born into it, there are no easy choices. You either fight or you fall." "What about love?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "Is there room for that in your world?" He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Love is a weakness. It makes you vulnerable to the ones who would use it against you." "Is that why you keep me at arm's length?" she challenged, feeling emboldened by their shared moments. "You're afraid of what I could mean to you?" "Fear has nothing to do with it," he snapped, but she could see the flicker of something in his eyes, a flicker that told her she was getting closer to the truth. "Really?" she pressed, stepping into the space between them. "Because it seems to me that you're scared of more than just your enemies." He took a step back, shaking his head as if trying to dispel her words. "You don't understand, and I don't have time to explain." "Then make time," she urged. "If I'm going to be here, I want to know you. I want to understand why you chose to take me." His eyes darkened with frustration, but she could see the conflict swirling within him. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she could break through the barriers he had erected around his heart. But just as she thought they were making progress, the tension in the air shifted. A sudden crash echoed from the hallway, followed by muffled voices. Her heart raced as the boss's demeanor changed instantly, his icy mask slipping back into place. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "I'll handle this." "Handle what?" she asked, unease creeping into her voice. "What's happening?" "Just do as I say," he insisted, moving toward the door. She watched him stride away, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, and the reality of her captivity hit her harder than ever. She was caught in a world of chaos, and she had no idea what was coming next. Moments later, the door burst open, and two men stormed in. They were dressed in dark suits, their expressions grim. The tension in the room escalated as the boss squared his shoulders. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "An issue with one of our shipments," one of the men replied, his eyes darting between her and the boss. "We need to discuss it now." The boss's expression hardened, and he turned to her. "I need you to stay here. No matter what happens, do not leave this room." "Like I have a choice?" she shot back, frustration boiling within her. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't understand the danger you're in. If they find you, it could mean trouble. Trouble I can't afford to have right now." The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She wanted to argue, to fight against the helplessness that threatened to engulf her, but as the men moved toward the door, she felt a chill of fear settle in her gut. "Promise me," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. "Promise me you'll stay here." "I promise," she replied, though she could feel the weight of her own uncertainty. As he stepped out, she was left alone in the room, feeling the darkness close in around her. What happened next felt like a blur. Voices rose in anger just outside the door, and her heart raced as the sound of a struggle echoed through the hall. She pressed her ear against the door, straining to make sense of the chaos that unfolded just beyond her reach. Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated through the walls, followed by a deafening silence. Panic surged through her as she hesitated, torn between staying hidden and rushing to help him. But before she could make a decision, the door swung open again and she gasped. The boss stood there, his expression fierce, but there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or desperation. Behind him, the two men were gone, and the hallway lay in silence. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I'm fine," she replied, though her heart still raced. "What happened out there?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," he said, but the tension in his voice hinted at something more. "But we need to talk about your father." Her heart sank at the mention of her father again. "What about him?" "He's a threat to me, to us, and in this world, I can't afford any loose ends. If he comes for you, then what?" she interrupted, her voice rising in frustration. "What will you do? Just toss me aside like I'm nothing?" He stepped closer, his expression darkening. "You're not nothing. You're the key to everything, but you have to understand the stakes." "What do you mean?" "Your father's actions have consequences. I'm not just fighting for my life, I'm fighting for yours too." Their eyes locked, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerability behind his cold facade. The weight of their situation crashed down upon her, and she realized they were both trapped by the choices of their pasts. In that moment, something shifted between them. The tension that had simmered for days surged to the surface, igniting a fire that neither of them had been willing to acknowledge until now. She felt the pull toward him, the danger of their connection, and it terrified her. "Why do you care?" she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. "You could just let me go." "Because you matter," he replied, his voice low and urgent, "and I can't let anything happen to you." She took a step closer, the distance between them dissolving. "Then what do we do?" He hesitated, the air crackling with unspoken words. The lines between enemy and ally blurred even further, and she could feel the gravity of their situation weighing heavily upon them. Before she could process the moment, he closed the distance, his hand brushing against hers. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her, igniting a fire within that she had tried to suppress. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "but we need to figure it out together." In that moment, they stood on the precipice of something new, something dangerous and exhilarating. The world outside continued to spin, but within the confines of that room, everything shifted. They were no longer just a boss and his captive. They were two souls caught in a web of fate, fighting against the darkness that sought to consume them both. What happened that night would change everything, and as the shadows closed in around them, she knew they were about to embark on a journey that would test the limits of their hearts and the strength of their bond. The stakes had never been higher, and in the dangerous game they found themselves playing, love and loyalty would soon collide in ways they could never have anticipated. The air in the room was thick with tension, a palpable weight that pressed against her chest as she stood face to face with the Yakuza boss. He was a formidable figure, his dark eyes piercing through her defenses, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't expected to see in someone so powerful. Her heart raced as she absorbed the gravity of their situation. She was not merely a pawn in his game of revenge. She was a living reminder of the man he loathed, the man who had caused him so much pain. As the moments stretched on, she could feel her resolve wavering. The fear that had initially gripped her began to morph into something else: curiosity, intrigue, and an undeniable attraction she had fought so hard to suppress. She was terrified of what that meant, of how he could make her feel even in the midst of chaos. But deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The question hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation all at once. His lips curled into a sly smile, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of humanity beneath the cold exterior. "I want you to understand," he replied, his voice low and measured. "I want you to know why you're here." Before she could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door, breaking the moment. He turned sharply, his demeanor shifting back to that of the ruthless leader she had initially encountered. The door swung open, and a man in a sharp suit stepped inside, his expression tense. "Boss, we have a situation," the man said, his eyes darting between them. "There's been a breach at the perimeter. We might have intruders." The boss's eyes darkened at the news, and she felt a chill run down her spine. This was the world of danger she had been thrust into, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. "I'll handle it," he said curtly, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned back to her, and for a brief moment, she saw the conflict in his gaze, the struggle between duty and something deeper that was beginning to grow between them. "Stay here, I'll be back." As he left the room, she was left in a swirl of uncertainty. Her mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear: she was entangled in a dangerous game, and the rules were shifting beneath her feet. Time passed slowly, each tick of the clock echoing in the silence. She paced the room, her thoughts a chaotic jumble. The memories of her father flooded her mind, the man she had always idolized, but now realized had connections to a world she knew nothing about. Why had he never told her? What had he been involved in that would lead to her being here, in the crosshairs of the Yakuza? Just as the weight of her thoughts threatened to consume her, the door swung open again. The boss re-entered, his expression fierce, but she could see the weariness in his eyes. He moved closer, and in that moment, their connection deepened. The air crackled with an unspoken understanding. "They're gone," he said, his voice low. "But this isn't over." She nodded, her heart pounding as she met his gaze. "What do you mean?" "The breach was just a distraction," he explained, his tone shifting to one of urgency. "There are those who want to use you against me. Your father's enemies will come for you now, and I can't let that happen." A chill ran through her as the reality of his words settled in. She was a target not just because of her father's past, but because of the power he wielded, a power she had never wanted to be associated with. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll protect you," he said, and for the first time, she sensed sincerity in his promise. But his eyes flickered with something darker, a shadow of the world he inhabited. "But it won't be easy. You'll have to trust me." Trust. It was a fragile thing, especially in a world built on betrayal and fear. She didn't know if she could completely trust him, but in that moment, she realized she had no choice. She was drawn to him in a way that both frightened and exhilarated her. "We need to move," he said, snapping her back to the present. "I have a safe house nearby. It's not perfect, but it will keep you out of sight for now." She hesitated for a moment, torn between the instinct to run and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. "What if I refuse?" she challenged, wanting to assert her independence. His gaze darkened, and she saw a flicker of the boss he had been just moments before. "You can refuse, but I won't let you go back to your old life, not while there are people out there who want to hurt you." The intensity of his words sent shivers down her spine. A part of her wanted to rebel, to fight against being treated like a possession. But another part, a part she was beginning to understand, was drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. "Fine," she relented, her voice steady. "Let's go." They moved quickly through the dimly lit corridors of the building, her heart racing as they navigated the shadows. The world outside was chaotic, a stark contrast to the quiet tension that had built between them. She could feel his presence beside her, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the walls. As they reached the exit, the night air hit her like a wave, cool and refreshing. The streets were alive with noise, but the chaos felt distant. He led her to a sleek black car parked under the flickering light of a street lamp. "Get in," he ordered, his voice low and commanding. She climbed into the passenger seat, her heart pounding as he slid in beside her. The engine roared to life, and they sped off into the night, leaving the building and the danger behind them, at least for the moment. As they drove through the winding streets, the city lights blurred past, and she stole glances at him. He was focused on the road, but there was an intensity in his expression that held her captive. She was beginning to understand the weight of the world he carried on his shoulders. "Tell me about your father," he said, suddenly, breaking the silence. His question took her by surprise, and she hesitated. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," he replied, his tone softer now. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with." She took a deep breath, the memories flooding back. He was a good man. He worked hard, provided for us, but he was always secretive about his past. "And now you're caught in the middle of it," he said, his voice filled with understanding. "I know it's not fair to you, but it's a reality we can't escape." Silence fell between them again, heavy with unspoken words. She felt the distance closing, a fragile connection forming amid the chaos. "What about you?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "What's your story?" He glanced at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You want to know about me?" "Why not?" she replied, a hint of defiance in her voice. "We're in this together now, right?" He chuckled softly, a sound that surprised her. "Together? That's one way to put it." As he began to share snippets of his life, the hardships, the sacrifices, the weight of leadership, she listened intently, feeling the walls between them crumbling. He was not just a ruthless Yakuza boss. He was a man shaped by his past, just like her. Their conversation flowed naturally, a dance of vulnerability and strength. Each revelation brought them closer, and with every passing moment, she felt a growing sense of connection that was both thrilling and terrifying. But the reality of their situation loomed large. They were both in danger, and the world outside the car was relentless. As they approached the safe house, the tension returned, heavier than before. The reality of what lay ahead settled in. The need to confront the enemies who sought to tear them apart. The safe house was a nondescript building tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, a stark contrast to the chaos of the Yakuza world. As they stepped inside, she felt a sense of safety wash over her, but it was fleeting. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice firm as he moved to secure the doors. She watched him, the conflict in her heart deepening. He was a protector, yet he was also the source of her current turmoil. The man who had taken her from her life was also the man who seemed to determine to keep her safe. "What if they find us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They won't," he said, his tone leaving little room for doubt. "I'll make sure of it." As he moved through the house, checking windows and ensuring they were hidden from view, she felt a surge of admiration for him. He was powerful, yes, but he was also deeply human, navigating a dangerous world with a fierce determination to protect her. "You're not like them," she said, suddenly, breaking the silence. He paused, turning to face her, curiosity lighting his eyes. "What do you mean?" "You have a choice," she replied, her heart racing. "You don't have to be defined by this world. You could walk away." He shook his head, a hint of sadness crossing his features. "I can't. There are responsibilities, loyalties, things I can't escape." "But what about us?" she pressed, the question hanging in the air between them. "What happens when this is all over?" His expression shifted, a mixture of longing and fear. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, she felt the weight of their connection, the intensity of their situation pulling them closer together. They were two souls caught in a storm, and as the world outside continued to spin out of control, their bond became a lifeline. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, shattering the fragile moment. They both froze, the reality of their situation crashing down like a tidal wave. "Get down," he shouted, instinctively pulling her to the ground as the sound of footsteps approached the door. Her heart raced as fear surged through her veins. The danger was real, and they were running out of time. He moved quickly, positioning himself between her and the door, his expression fierce and focused. "Stay quiet," he instructed, his tone leaving no room for argument. The sounds grew louder, and she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her. They were coming for her, and the realization was suffocating. "Whatever happens, don't move," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. She nodded, her heart pounding as she watched him prepare for what lay ahead. He was a warrior, a protector, and in that moment, she felt a rush of admiration and fear for the man who had become her unexpected ally. As the door burst open, she held her breath, the world around her fading into the background. She was ready to fight for her freedom, for her life, and for whatever connection they had forged in the darkness. But as the figures stormed in, she realized that their battle was far from over. Together, they would confront the demons of their pasts and fight for a future that was uncertain but filled with possibility. In that moment, as chaos erupted around them, she knew their bond would be tested in ways they could never have anticipated. And as they faced the storm together, she understood that love could emerge even in the darkest of places, lighting a path through the shadows. No matter what happened next, they would face it together.